So, salam, shalom, shanti, sat Sri Akal, peace. Welcome, everyone. My name is Shanon Shah. I'm the Director of Faith for the Climate, and I'd like to give you all a warm welcome to our first webinar of 2026 on the theme of climate justice and interfaith renewal. And what a challenging year it's been already. I don't know about you, but many mornings I've woken up and I've just not wanted to get out from under my duvet. But I do. And especially today, I've been excited because we're actually hosting this webinar right in the middle of World Interfaith Harmony Week. And I thought I'd give this context because it's really important. We're hosting this webinar not because we want to ignore or escape from or downplay the seriousness of everything that's happening around us and in the world, but it's rather so that we can take a moment to contemplate, go deep, and learn from the wisdom of our faith traditions together so that we can address whatever's going on outside and inside us with more compassion, with more care, with more loving kindness.
Wow,
And the
wow,
calendar of faith
wow.
and spiritual traditions is constantly packed with wisdom. So this past January, we had the festival of Epiphany in the Christian tradition. We had the heavenly ascent and the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Isra and Mi'raj in the Islamic tradition. We also had Lohri, which is a midwinter Punjabi festival. And there was also the Celtic festival of Imbolc and the Christian festival of Candlemas. So lots already. This month is even more amazing because literally, because of how the stars are aligned this year, we are seeing a beautiful confluence of sacred moments this month across many different faith traditions. So this week we saw the Jewish festival of Tu Bishvat, the birthday of the trees. And then in a couple of weeks, within a space of about 3 days, we will have the Hindu festival of Mahashivaratri, which is dedicated to the Lord Shiva. We will have Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year on the 17th of February. Then on the 18th of February, I think we will have Lent beginning in the Western rite of Christianity. Also, probably a Ramadan for Muslims, depending on the moon sighting. And Losar, which is the Tibetan Buddhist New Year. So lots and lots of things happening this month. And to cap it all, this month is also the Climate Coalition's Show the Love campaign. We'll be putting in the chat box in a minute more information about Show the Love and how you can get involved. But just from a larger perspective, we thought how better to show our love for people and planet than to come together today to share our inspirations with each other in a world where the headlines are increasingly full of division, polarization, and atrocities of various kinds. Now, in a minute, I will be handing over to our facilitator of the discussion today, our chair and co-founder, Canon Giles Goddard, who's also vicar of St. John's Church, Waterloo. But before I do that, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement that I think is quite important to set the context. Now, many of you know that the Faith for the Climate Network exists to encourage, inspire, and equip people of all faiths in their work on the climate crisis. And we know that many of our faiths and belief systems share a golden rule, which is to treat others as you wish to be treated. Yet we acknowledge that within the reality of all faith traditions, this golden rule has often been violated, ignored, or manipulated throughout history and in the present. So I'd like to acknowledge the very deep harms, including ecocide, genocide, and other forms of violence, exploitation, and abuse that have often been perpetrated or justified under the banner of faith. And by coming together today, what we are doing is we are honoring the deeper wisdom about moral and ethical correction and repair that is foundational in all our faith traditions. So we come together to be nourished by the wisdom in our faith traditions also that celebrates our planet as a gift, so that together we can model what it means to have true faith for climate justice. And in that spirit, I'd like to invite you to join us all. Join us all in a moment of silence now to say a prayer or a meditation or just a silent reflection before I hand over to Giles. So let's have a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. This is the last you'll hear from me. I'm going to hand you over to Canon Giles Goddard.
Thank you, Shanon, and greetings, everybody. It's very good to be with you, and thank you for coming. I'm very excited about this webinar, not least because it's kind of in a series, really. Some of you might have been at the webinar that we had last year celebrating Diwali and thinking about the importance of light and climate in the non-Abrahamic traditions. And so it feels very good to be having this as a kind of follow-up, so that we're involving all the different faith traditions in our work. And it's very good to be joined by old friends and new. Some people I can see on the screen I've been working with ever since the founding of Faith for Climate back in 2014, and others are new to me. So thank you all for being with us, and thank you for your commitment to continuing to work for climate justice in a world which, as we all know, is becoming increasingly inimical towards that. It means that our voices are even more important. So we have a really great and a really fantastic group of speakers who've agreed to be with us today. We have Naomi Verber. I'll introduce all the speakers properly when they speak, but first of all we have Naomi Verber on Tu Bishvat. So she's talking about the birthday of the trees, which began at sundown on Sunday the 1st of February to nightfall on Monday the 2nd. We've got Bokani Tshidzu, who's talking about Lent, and Lent starts on Ash Wednesday, the 18th of February, and takes us through to Easter for Christians following the Latin Rite. Then we've got Kamran Shezad, who's talking to us about Ramadan, probably starting on the 19th of February for many or most Muslims. And then finally, we've got Suraiya, who will be reflecting on this from Islamic Relief. So they're all kind of stars of the climate faith justice movement, and I'm delighted to have you all as part of this webinar. So we're going to start with Naomi Verber, who left a 15-year career in the city as a management consultant to become an environmental activist within the Jewish community. And she was saying just now she's never worked harder than she is now. You're a former chair of Golders Green Synagogue, where you put environmental responsibility at the top of the community's agenda, and you're partnering with the Jewish charity Shezad to conceptualize, design and run Europe's first kosher eco hotel. Naomi went on to become the head of environmental policy for the United Synagogue, running the Dorot program, the United Synagogue, and the Office of the Chief Rabbi's ambitious environmental initiative to reduce the charity's environmental impact. Naomi is now the executive director of Eco Judaism, where her role is to deliver the organization's vision, a world where environmental responsibility is core to Jewish identity, and Judaism brings a unique inspiration to the global environmental movement. So huge thanks, Naomi, for being with us and for all that you're doing. Tell us about Tu Bishvat.
Thank you, Giles. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for having me. I'm just going to screen share. Get this on present mode and tell me if it's coming through. Give that a moment. Are we all good in business?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. So the title of this talk got increasingly longer as I delve more and more into this fascinating subject. But I'm going to talk to you about a specific place and a specific time, which is a crossroads in interfaith relationships that had the most beautiful outcome. So I'm going to dive straight in and take you to the beautiful mountaintop city of Safat in northern Israel. It's right here in the eastern Galilee region. And this place, and we've got to imagine now we're in the 16th century. So it kind of looked a bit like this. Now you'll immediately see that there is Islamic architecture there and an Islamic feel to the place. This place became one of the most extraordinary spiritual laboratories in Jewish history. And what made Safat unique was not only the brilliance and the leadership of the Jewish mystics, the Kabbalists, who all centered around this place at a certain point in time, but also the shared culture and religious ecosystem that they inhabited alongside Muslims, particularly Sufis and Christians in this region. And these encounters at this place and at this time profoundly shaped Jewish mysticism and even transformed the meaning of a holiday we now take for granted with a whole new meaning. And that's Tu Bishvat, the 15th of Shvat, the Jewish New Year for trees. So to understand why all these traditions were present together, we need to sort of go back in history a bit. So I'm going to skip through 3,000 years of Jewish history and get to the part where the imperial Roman conquest of Israel, Judea, resulted in catastrophic series of events, the destruction of the Second Temple, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and the forced expulsion and dispersion through awful conditions for the Jewish population there, which forced that population out of Israel. And they made their way to various parts of the Roman Empire at first, and a large community settled in Spain. And for over 1,500 years, the Jewish community was very well integrated with the Moorish kingdom of Iberia. They were part of the social, economic, and cultural fabric of that society, a very peaceful, prosperous time. With the Catholic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, particularly during the reign of Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, there was a terrible decree against the Jewish community in 1492, which was either forced conversion to Christianity or expulsion from Spain. And I just want to note here that, and something I learned recently, that at the same time, 1492 was also a year in which the Muslim Moor community were also given an ultimatum by the regime in Spain, which was forced conversion. And here are some paintings and iconography from the time. And then about 100 years later, it was forced expulsion, regardless of whether you were a convert or not. So really a joint trauma there of those two communities, which for over a millennia had got on so well. But that the Alhambra decree, the expulsion of Jews in 1492 from Spain, resulted in some of the leading lights within Jewish intellectual and religious life. This is this chap here is Rabbi Yosef Karo. We have the Ramak, the Radar. These are big figures in Jewish literature and law. They moved from Spain with parts of their community back to Israel, to Safat, to this very particular place. Now, why did they move there? At this point in time, that part of Israel was under the Ottoman Empire. And unlike parts of Europe, it was actively welcoming Jewish refugees for their economic skills, their intellectual capital, and this sort of history of joint good relations. So Safat under Ottoman rule was like kind of this magnet for the Jewish community. It was economically prosperous. It had a very specific textiles trade, like a fine wool production trade, which the Jewish and Muslim communities were involved in. It was politically stable, and it was, had, of course, the association of Israel and the holy sites there. Now, at the same time, so all these great leaders, like it's kind of like, the very top intellectual elite of the Jewish world have now centered in this it's a small city now, Safat. It was a very, very small city back then. They're kind of all there. And at the very same time, the Ottoman world is experiencing a flourishing of Islamic mysticism, particularly Sufism. And as it so happened in this very region was a remaining strong ancient Eastern Christian monastic tradition. So this part of Israel is near Nazareth, it's near the Galilee Sea, it's near Capernaum. I'm never sure if I pronounced that correctly. So it had a strong pilgrim and living monastic, sort of permanent monastic communities. So Safat sat in this multi-religious landscape, and Jews, Muslims, and Christians they're not living in isolation. They're walking the same streets. They speak the same language. They often work in the same trade. And the sort of historic documents show that the Sufi lodges were, streets away. I mean, it's kind of, when I say streets in Safat, it's a tiny area. So it's within spitting distance from the great academies and synagogues of the Ari and the main Kabbalists who sort of led Jewish spiritual life in this area. Now, they had there's no evidence of theological fluidity it was more a sort of just shared language, metaphor, cosmology, and spiritual techniques that were so evocative in this area at that time. So they were not borrowing doctrines from each other as such, but all of these religions were interacting in an atmosphere of the mystical practice around them. That was the kind of the mode of the day. So I'm just going to flick down here to my next slide. Oh, sorry, one of my pictures didn't come up there. So from the Kabbalists absorbed from the Sufi movement that was so strong in Safat an emphasis on experimental spirituality, so living the ideas of the Torah, not just textual study, and they've seen this around them. Meditative intention, we call this kavanah in Hebrew, but it's the same idea of focusing on the words of blessings or the words of a text in a meditative state. Sacred chanting and repetitive formulas. This is a very new thing in Judaism that comes in around this time. And the idea that human actions repair cosmic fractures in the world. That is a key Kabbalist idea that was formed at this time. The Christian mysticism in the area contributed to concepts like deep contemplation, spiritual ascent through levels, symbolic reading of nature, and sacred meals as ritualized encounters with holiness. So it's quite an intense, heavy place to be, but what's this all got to do with Tu Bishvat? So these ideas were, the place that they found, they were all channeled into, was the reincarnation of Tu Bishvat by the Kabbalists in Safat in the 16th century. So Tu Bishvat originally started out in the Bible as a key concept around redistribution of wealth, essentially. It was all about the idea of giving your tithes to either the priestly caste in society who were landless and then relied entirely on your contributions to live, and also to the poor. These weren't kind of acts of kindness, they were institutionalized welfare structure within Judaism that ensured a redistribution of wealth. But with the exile, and there's some pictures of the priests receiving their tithes, but with the exile and the sort of dispersion of Jews after the Roman takeover of Israel, that became a redundant idea, because how can you give tithe when you don't have a land? You're no longer an agricultural people, you're a diaspora spread around the world. So Tu Bishvat sort of became quieter, and it wasn't really part of the day-to-day Jewish experience. But this all changed in Safat. The Kabbalists reimagined Tu Bishvat as a cosmic turning point, a moment when divine energy begins to flow back into the natural world after winter. This was very much influenced by Islamic and Christian mysticism, symbolism of trees, gardens, flowing life force, and they developed what's called the Tu Bishvat Seder. Here's some pictures of it. Fortunately, once I've gone on screen share, some of my pictures I haven't shown. This is an Ethiopian community in Israel, and this is a British TikTok Jewish influencer showing how this Tu Bishvat Seder emerged as a result of the Kabbalists working on the concept at this time. So it is modeled after the Passover Seder, but it's much closer to the mystical banquets of Sufi brotherhoods and monastic ritualized eating as well. So just kind of what happens at these Seders, there are 4 cups of wine. You move from from white wine representing snow to the red wine representing spring. There are 15 carefully chosen fruits, which you eat with special blessings, and they represent 15 levels of ascension and different spiritual worlds. The blessings are recited with intense mystical intention, and the eating itself is a symbol of repairing a fracture in creation, both a very strong Sufi and Kabbalist idea. So just to wrap up, to say that Safat was not a Jewish enclave. It at that point was an Ottoman city, but it became a place where Jewish mystics could articulate something new, precisely because they were in conversation, whether direct or indirect, with other seekers of the divine. And I think this whole story of Safat at that time teaches us that holiness is, often emerges most powerfully not behind walls, but at crossroads. And just a nice little ending to say that Tu Bishvat has had another reincarnation, a third one, if you like, as an ecological festival, and particularly with the kibbutz movement, but across the world, inside Israel and beyond as a time to plant trees, taking that Kabbalist idea of the flow of life through trees and planting them across the world. And it's so popular now that there's even a Sesame Street episode about it, has resonance across the secular and religious parts of the Jewish community and beyond. And I thought this was so great. I just randomly Googled, are there still Sufis in Safat today? And I came up with this poster on Facebook that there is a Druze, Arab, Jewish Sufi group called Tarak Eliyahu. It started in 2024, and they meet every Wednesday. So they're still kind of embodying and living this beautiful crossroads of spiritual ideas, tolerance and peace seeking together. So that's me. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Naomi, so much for that. What a really fascinating talk. And I can see you've done a huge amount of research and got it into a very small space, so well done. And I always like the idea of a festival with 4 cups of wine. That sounds like a good festival. Lovely, thank you. That was really fascinating. Now we're honoured to have Bokani with us. Bokani is a London-based artist, originally from Zimbabwe. Her art explores how we connect with each other, the earth, and beyond. She creates abstract glass paintings, installations, computational and conceptual artwork. Bokani has also been the Bright Now campaign officer at Operation Noah, an ecumenical Christian climate justice charity since March 2020. She coordinates communication about the campaign with partners and liaises with religious organisations divesting from fossil fuels. Full disclosure, I used to be a trustee of Operation Noah, and it's a wonderful charity work organisation. Bokani was co-founder of sustainability startup Vertigo Ventures and has a degree in politics with economics from the University of Bath. You can read more about Bokani's work in a wonderful interview which Shanon did with her as part of our Black History Month offerings last year. And today Bokani is going to talk about Ash Wednesday and what that and Lent means to her. Thank you, Bokani. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that brilliant introduction. I've got so many thoughts that I'm really inspired by, and I think it segues so well and beautifully into something I've been thinking about when it comes to Lent and my heritage in Zimbabwe, being Kalanga and Ndebele, and we observe certain, I guess we call them taboos, where certain trees are not to be cut at particular times, or certain animals that are not to be eaten, and some are really specific to individual families whose surnames are taken from the names of those animals, and they're sort of guardians of those animals. And these taboos present a sort of boundary which are essential for maintaining balance in our natural world. And I was brought up in the Catholic tradition in Zimbabwe, and my grandmother used the same word for taboo to describe some of our Lenten observances and disciplines, and the word is ukuzila, like refraining from eating meat, for example. And I've begun to reflect on how this refusal is not a lack of agency, but rather like a profound reclamation of power. Sometimes this is the best way in which we can express, is to move away from. And so Lent, for me and my family, provided this sort of scaffolding that would intercept our autopilot sort of daily habits. And today, what this might look like is a campaign that I recently heard about, which is the Refuse and Unsubscribe campaign, where people are boycotting tech giants and streaming services to protest against the support of violence that some of these tech companies have been providing. And it creates a sort of necessary check and balance against institutional overreach. And sometimes these seasonal shifts inspire more permanent changes. And so, again, as I was thinking about Lent, I thought, what might be other ways in which we do this in our daily lives? And, you know, in the context, I live in London, and in that context, I thought about maybe one of the campaigns that we are running at Operation Noah alongside partners like Just Money movement, and it's to switch to a greener bank. So using the big bank switch, you can do this as an individual, you can do this as part of your community, and thinking again, how can these smaller actions be observed at a wider scale? And it might be to consider a green investment declaration, for example, to ensure that your capital supports cleaner energy rather than destructive energy sources. I will be linking all these in the chat, so if you want to follow up and check them out, they'll be available for you. And so whilst Lent is often viewed through that lens of sacrifice or moving away from what we might consider more harmful practices, I am also a more is more sort of person. My paintings are sort of defined by this vibrance of color and texture. And I even think of, in Lent, we think about Jesus going into the wilderness. I think of that as a wild jungle rather than necessarily a desolate desert. So if you share a little bit in that more is more spirit, I might invite you to take something up during Lent. And there's something I've done in previous years. And we have a Bible study that Operation Noah has developed as a 5-week Bible study called Where Your Treasure Is. And it explores using our resources to tackle the climate crisis. And obviously its name is taken from Matthew's Gospel, where he says, do not store up, where Jesus says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. And so I will leave you with this, I hope, helpful observation that I heard in a homily during Lent a couple of years ago. And again, it's from, we're reflecting on Matthew's Gospel. And I think Matthew sort of understood the trappings of wealth and power intimately because he was, of course, a tax collector, and understood how these might be at the root of some of our interconnected crises. So I often return to the first temptation of Christ in the wilderness, where the tempter says, if you're the Son of God, then tell these stones to become bread. And I hadn't realized as I was preparing for this talk that temptation, I often think of it as coming at the beginning of Lent. And so didn't really think about the fact that, this is happening after Jesus has already been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. So I'm not great at fasting. And so I can just imagine you're so hungry. And we get really drawn into that picture and think about Jesus being tempted to get some food. And I don't think that temptation is really about food. It's about identity and it's about doubt. So the first question, the first temptation is really to question if you are the Son of God. In an era of manufactured insecurity, polarization, and a cost of living crisis, we're often tempted to forget that we are beloved children of God. And for me, the belief that we have an inalienable dignity binds my fate to yours. So this Lent, I might also invite you to act in solidarity with global siblings by endorsing the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and by seeking an end to coal, oil and gas expansion. And finding ways where possible to protect the most vulnerable in our communities and in our society and affirm that inalienable dignity of being God's children. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Bokani, very much again for a wonderful and thought-provoking talk. I like the idea of Jesus' wilderness being a forest rather than a desert. I'm going to stay with that through Lent. And thank you for making the connections. So much of what we're talking about today is about the parallels and connections between faith traditions, but that's because we are all deeply connected as human beings. So thanks for reminding us of that. So now we're going on to Kamran, the wonderful Kamran, who's going to talk to us about Ramadan. Kamran is a qualified environmental professional who's been recognised in the Ends Report Power List as one of the UK's top 100 most impactful environmental professionals. Kamran is a grassroots environmental activist and social justice campaigner. He's worked with a diverse range of community and faith groups and has produced toolkits, practical guides, and mobilised communities. Kamran is one of the lead authors of Al-Mizan, A Covenant for the Earth, which is a comprehensive manifesto on climate justice from an Islamic perspective and a kind of response to Laudato Si. And if you haven't read it, after this, find it and read it. Kamran holds a master's degree. There you go. It's in the chat now. Kamran holds a master's degree in environmental sustainability, and he's a full member of the Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Professionals. And Kamran has been a good friend of ours right from the very beginning. So we're delighted to have you with us, Kamran. Over to you.
Shalom and happy festival for Tu Bishvat, a meaningful and reflective Lent to all those observing, and a Ramadan Mubarak to all those who will soon be welcoming this blessed month and the whole blessed period of all our faiths and everything that Shanon spoke about in the beginning. And thank you so much, Giles and Shanon, for inviting me. And it's always been a pleasure and an honor to be a good friend of Faithful Climate. And of course, thank you to everyone else for being here today. I want to start off with a very simple phrase. If you can see that. It's very simply end the climate crisis fast. And yes, we want to end it very quickly. But also, for those of you who spotted my play on words there, we can all help end it by fasting. And I know that sounds almost too simple. Some may even say naive, because we all know that the climate crisis is complex. It's global, political, technological. But in reality, the solution at its heart is pretty simple. It's simplicity, it's modesty, and it's humility. And I genuinely believe that if we all mastered those three traits, the climate crisis would largely solve itself. And in a sense, Ramadan is a masterclass in exactly that. Now, during Ramadan, from dawn to sunset, we voluntarily stop consuming no food, no drink, no indulgence. But for us as Muslims, Ramadan isn't really seen as a deprivation. It's an opportunity for us to recalibrate. Ramadan resets that relationship with consumption. It reminds us how little we actually need. It softens our attachment to constant wanting. And that's probably very relevant to the world we live in today. Yes, the climate crisis is an energy crisis, it's a technology crisis, it's a consumption crisis. But at the heart of it, we too are the crisis. Very simply putting it, we're just taking more from the earth than the earth can give us. And most of you all know about World Overshoot Day. It's the day each year when humanity has used up all the ecological resources that the planet can regenerate in that year. And after that day, we're basically living on ecological credit, borrowing from the future, from our children. And last year, that day fell on 24th July, which means that for 6 months of the year, humanity is overspending the Earth's budget. Now, just imagine doing that financially. Imagine running out of money in July and pretending everything is fine until December. So that's what we're doing to the planet at the moment. So in a sense, Ramadan teaches us the opposite mindset. It teaches us to live within limits, to pause before taking, to feel hunger and to feel thirst, more as an awareness, not as suffering, because awareness is truly what we need. It's about what we need and what we don't need. And the month of Ramadan, it teaches us discipline over desire. It teaches us greed over gratitude over greed. It teaches us reflection over reaction. And those are exactly the qualities that a sustainable world requires. And I'd just like to add that sustainability shouldn't just be seen as converting to solar panels or using electric cars. People quite often forget that sustainability is also about learning to say, I don't need it. I've had enough. I need to stop. So when we fast, we're learning that we don't need to snack constantly. We don't need to consume endlessly. We don't need excess, to feel fulfilled. And if we can do that with food and drink, which is our most basic human needs, just imagine what that means for everything else we consume, whether it's clothes, gadgets, energy, water, just stuff. So, just a shameless plug alert. This is why I've created the Eco Ramadan Guide. Roche will share a link on the chat box where you can download a free copy of this. I invite you to explore it, share it, and most importantly, live it. The biggest global solutions begin with the smallest personal changes. And Ramadan gives us that perfect training ground. And it does, although it's very Islamically inspired, it also does speak to non-Muslims, and the actions in there are very universal. And when I was penning this guide, I just wanted us all to be, all the readers to be inspired by the message in the guide, to align our spiritual practices with the care for the earth. In the guide, I share simple, practical ways on how to reduce food waste at iftar, around water conservation, around sustainable transport, charitable giving, especially for environmental causes, the power of prayer, and so much more. Please do read it. And I was also very conscious not to make this booklet come across as something that becomes burdensome if we change the way we do, or simply as a to-do and not to-do list, because we know what human nature is like. When we tell people what to do, what not to do, we do the opposite. But I wanted to encourage the reader to see environmental consciousness as a natural extension of Ramadan's spiritual essence. To know that wasting less, consuming less, and being mindfulness is not just eco-friendly, but that it is deeply Islamic and it is deeply spiritual. So if Ramadan can teach millions of people for 1 month to live with less, just imagine the impact if even a fraction of that mindset was carried into the rest of the year. And that is definitely one way how we can begin to push World Overshoot Day later and later. And that's how we begin to live within the Earth's limit again. So I end with exactly the same message that I began with: end the climate crisis fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamran, again for another thought-provoking and inspiring talk. I keep Ramadan every year now, and it's particularly wonderful when Ramadan and Lent coincide, because they are very similar, but they are different as well. And I think for me, the experience of fasting for the whole day, it feels very different to what we're doing in Lent. They're both incredibly enriching, but when they come together, yeah, it's a real opportunity. And I'm also reminded of that famous phrase, in my every act, I create my world. Because how we behave individually is about the kind of world that we want to live in. So many, many thanks for that. We have until about 10 to 2 for questions, so 8 minutes. For any questions or comments, you can either put them in the chat or you can use the raise hand function and I'll call you. But this is an opportunity for conversation as well as questions. So anything that anybody wants to say, feel free. Or if you have any experiences or any thoughts. Or just while you're all thinking, while I'm thinking too. Naomi, just going back to Tu Bishvat, I love the way that it's become a festival, become an important festival increasingly. Can you talk about how maybe it's being lived out now by different organisations?
Yeah, sure. It really has had a huge reincarnation. It was something that, even with the evolution of the Kabbalists, Tu Bishvat, it remained very much part of religious, ritualistic life. But from the 20th century onwards, it became still held those elements, and that's what religious communities still do with the fruit and the symbolism. But a secular element evolved around the tree planting itself. And this was hugely popular in Eastern European Jewish communities. I looked into the history of England. It sort of came to England a lot later, possibly even as late as the 60s and 70s, where it became a more popular way of expressing this festival through planting trees. But that's now the sort of predominant association with Tu Bishvat. It's the New Year, Jewish New Year for trees. And even though it wasn't a tree planting festival originally, it was this marking of the time in which to take your tithes from the trees, it now is firmly embedded as the tree planting time. So that happens around the world with Jewish institutions, but also a great interfaith moment as well, because we'll often team up with other organizations, Jewish and non-Jewish NGOs, to plant trees around the UK, and it happens sort of globally. So that's how we got to here.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And the other thing I'm reminded while you're talking is that Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost in Christian tradition, is derived, I think, from a harvest festival in the Jewish tradition.
Yes.
So everything connects. One of my favorite uses.
That's one of the other names for Sukkot is Chag HaKatzir, the festival of the harvest. It's both at the same time.
Yeah. And we're also divorced from the land, but the Christian year works very much in accordance with the agricultural year. So that's why Easter is in the spring. We've got a comment from Anita Totsi about Laudato Si in the Catholic Church. And yeah, we are deeply grateful for Laudato Si and for the way in which it's changed the conversation. Are there any other questions or comments or anything anybody wants to share? If not, then I'll hand on to Suraiya, Suraiya Rahman is the Campaigns and Public Affairs Coordinator at Islamic Relief UK. And Suraiya's going to briefly share the details of an interfaith iftar, which is being organised by Islamic Relief UK and supported by Faith for Climate and Manar Mosque. So Suraiya, over to you.
Thank you, Giles, and afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this really thought-provoking conversation. I've learned so much from all the speakers. So yeah, thank you so much for organising this, everyone at Faith for the Climate. Just to share, we are partnering with Faith for the Climate, Shanon and the team, to host an eco-iftar, very much in the spirit of Eco-Ramadan that Kamran mentioned, to basically bring our communities together at Manar Mosque in northwest London. So we've titled it Together at the Table, and that will be happening on Friday the 6th of March. And I think it's just a really wonderful opportunity, given all the different overlaps in our festivals that are taking place over the next few weeks and coming months, to really really come together and think about some of our shared values of stewardship and care and environmental consciousness. Also share a delicious plant-based iftar together, and we'll be hoping to avoid any food waste and no plastics, and really try to live some of those values and habits that Kamran and some of the other ideas that have been floated around. So we would love to have you there if you can come. I think Rush has just popped it into the chat. The tickets are free. We want to make it accessible and enjoyable for everyone. So please do come along and share with your networks more widely. We'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Suraiya. I'm really looking forward to being there. It's going to be great.
Yes, and Giles will be speaking that night, which will be fantastic. So if you'd love to hear more from Giles, please do come along.
Great. Good. Well, that brings us nearly to the end of our webinar. I think I don't need to make it more clearly, except to say that these things are very important now, and they're becoming increasingly important, aren't they? I've been writing an article this morning about the upturn and interest in spirituality among young people that we're certainly seeing at the moment here at St John's, and I think other people are as well. Probably as a reaction to the challenges which the world is facing. And the more we have these kind of conversations, the better. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing in your local areas as well. I know that there's a huge amount going on in different places. And if there's any way in which you can share our conversations today, that would be great. There is going to be, Marie, there is a recording, and the recording will be coming out very soon once we've processed it. There will also be more events coming up in our newsletter. If you haven't already signed up for the Faith for Climate newsletter, please do so. There's another one coming out next week. You go to the Faith for Climate website. And I'm also going to take this opportunity to do a shameless plug for my book, which is coming out at the end of this month. It's called Exploring Spirit, and it's about spirituality in its broadest sense. And it's about how spirituality underpins action and action underpins spirituality. So there are chapters on lament, chapters on justice, chapters on life, chapters on creativity, chapters on death. And it's bringing them all together and trying to connect what we're doing in our daily lives with a deeper spirituality. It's kind of aimed at people who are perhaps exploring, but it's also for those who are quite far along in the spiritual journey. So do have a look at that. And it's also on special offer at the moment. So if you pre-order now, you get a special price. There you are, shameless abuse of the chair's position. But I think now let's just keep a moment of silence together and hold what we've taught, hold what we've heard in our hearts and in our thoughts and in our prayers, remembering the challenges which I don't need to outline, which are facing all of us. And remembering that it is the individual actions together that make a difference. A million matches or a million candles makes a wonderful light. So we'll keep a couple of minutes of silence because we have a bit of time, and then we'll say goodbye to each other.